Okay, so today we're going to talk about rendering and then some post-processing, what to do with those renders once we have them. I know we've talked a little bit about rendering before, and this isn't going to be a super deep dive, but this is going to cover a little bit more than we have in the past and also serve as a bit of a refresher. So here's the scene that I have. It's just this robot that I snagged from the Arnold website as a demo for the Edgeware tutorial. I figured it would work well for this as well. And first, let's just kind of review some render settings. So we want to make sure we're using the Arnold renderer, which I believe is the default on all these computers. It shouldn't be an issue. Image format, EXR, is like a high dynamic range image file format, so that's fine. Photoshop will read that just fine. We don't need to worry about frames because we're just rendering single images. Make sure you have your render camera set and image size. So for this recording, I'm going to be using HD 540 in an effort for the renders not to take forever, and also because I don't have a very large screen. But I am requiring that your final renders be at 1080, so full HD. That's the preset that you're going to want. It's 1920 by 1080. Everything else in the Common tab you can leave alone. The other tabs that you really need to worry about, because I don't think we're going to have to worry about any of the other tabs, is just the Arnold renderer. And so we have this sampling section. Sampling is basically, well, it's how many samples, how many calculations does it do per pixel in your scene. And the way that this works is they are multipliers. So the actual number of samples you can see up here. Camera samples is 4, diffuse samples is 16. And the way that this works is it squares whatever value. So the camera is, it's set to 2, so it's going to square. That's going to multiply 2 times 2. That's where you get 4. For everything else, it squares the value, and then it's a multiplier of the camera. So if we've got 2 in the diffuse, it's going to be 2 times 2, 4, times the camera, which is also 4, and that's how you get 16. Okay, specular is 3 times 3, which gets you 9, and then 9 times 4 is 36, and that's how we have 36 specular samples. That also means that if we increase the camera sampling, that's increasing all of them, and you can potentially bring down the other sliders to compensate. For a kind of medium quality render, you're looking at, for the camera, somewhere around 4 samples, 8 being high quality, and then any more than that is getting into super high quality, which you shouldn't have to worry about. Yeah, and then the other thing to think about as you're adjusting your sampling is if you don't have any subsurface scattering in your scene, then you can just turn that down to 0 because you don't need to worry about that. Same thing with volume rendering. If you're not worrying about that, then we can just turn that off. I'll link to the Arnold website if you want to get into the real nitty-gritty with what each of these sliders do. Don't really want to do that here. I do, however, want to call out ray depth, and I will link to this page as well. So the ray depth, you can basically tell Arnold how many light rays are getting into the scene. So if we look at just the way the light is bouncing around this room, in this example, with a ray depth of 0 means there's no bounced light. 1, you get some nice bounced light, and then 2, you get even more light into the scene, especially if you look at this vertical line here. You see a lot more light is hitting it just with a diffuse ray depth of 2. So if you're using lighting similar to this, where you just have a little bit of light coming in through a window, and you want that to be the primary source of illumination, check your ray depth. You can see here's a great before and after of a production ready interior scene in a ray depth of 1 versus 3. But also note, and they do make note of it here, that the render is 3 times longer. So if you're rendering at 10 minutes a frame now, and you bump up that ray depth, it's going to be 30 minutes a frame. So figure out what you can afford as far as time and rendering. Again, we're only doing still frames, so you should be okay to crank that up a bit, which is something to keep in mind. Same thing with glossy. So if you've got a lot of glossy things next to each other and you're seeing random black spots in these reflections, it's because the ray depth isn't high enough. The rays, a light ray is bouncing off of one object and then that's it. If you need to up that ray depth so that it can bounce off of that object and the object next to it and then fill in those reflections. Okay, so it's like the number of bounces in a scene. Another example of reflection ray depth with 2, you just get a couple of bounces, and then as you increase that ray depth, you will see more reflection in the scene. This page is kind of a great reference, both for what each thing does, but also just to have that visual example of, if we were dealing with volumetrics, you see the difference between volumetric ray depth and how everything works. Same thing with transparency. If you have a bunch of empty glasses lined up and you're getting some black spots, it's just because the light rays aren't going far enough through. Every time it has to pass through one of those surfaces, that's basically 1 in that ray depth. So you need to increase that in order to get enough ray depth to see all the way through in that physically accurate manner. So something to keep in mind. I will link that on D2L. And the last thing that probably not the last thing, but the other thing that I'll link is just kind of a how-to on removing noise as you're going through your renders. You'll see some noise, and I definitely, I don't want any noise. We will actually probably add a little bit back in Photoshop, but I'll talk about that when we get to that. But you'll see all sorts of different types of noise that can be caused by a number of different things, as this image indicates. And so as you're seeing that and you want to figure out how to fix that, this will take you through how you can, identify what's causing that and then what you need to adjust in order to minimize or eliminate that noise. Again, we're going to be using Photoshop. We can use some of those tools to clean up our images, but you still want to get a nice clean render, and you should still know how to do that. So, but again, as with all things, as you increase samples and ray depth, it's going to increase render time, so it is a trade-off there. So that's it for the render settings, but I want to talk about what we're going to be rendering. So up until now, we've just basically added a camera, added some lights, and hit render, and what we got is what we got, and that's what we kind of called the final product. But now I want to talk about ways that you can elevate that and really show off your models. So there's going to be three additional renders on top of the main color render. It's going to be an ambient occlusion render, a wireframe render, and a clay render. So the wireframe and the clay are just going to be to show off your modeling, and that's what I want to start with. So I'm going to close my render view, and if we go up in this top toolbar, next to the hypershade icon is this icon that is the render setup editor. I'm going to click on that, and it's going to open up a window that looks like this. And we've got a render setup on one side and then a property editor on the other side. And it says I have no layers. Well, I'm going to add one layer, and I will call this wireframe layer. Okay. And so what we'll be able to do is basically override the materials of everything in the scene, give it a new material without, getting rid of all the other stuff. So if you just follow along on the first one, it'll make sense once you kind of see the end result. So I've got my wireframe layer. I'm going to right click on that, and I want to create a collection, and I will call this collection wire. And we've got some properties. The important thing to take note of here is we need to add objects to the collection. So you can have this only affect certain objects in your scene. but we want this to affect everything. So I'm going to go to a perspective view, and I'm just going to click and drag across my robot to select all the objects, and I'm going to shift click the background because I don't want that to be wireframe. I'm only concerned about the robot. And then in my property editor, I'm just going to click add, and it's going to add all of those objects to this collection. We've added a render layer, and we've created a collection that is saying what objects are going to be affected by this layer. Now we need to tell Maya and Arnold what that effect is going to be. So I'm going to right click on the collection, and I'm going to click Create Shader Override. Okay, and this is just going to, whenever this layer is active, it's going to replace all the shaders in the group, in the collection, with whatever shader I tell it to right now. And so what I want to do, excuse me, first I'm going to just give it a prefix. I'm going to say wire_shader override, and then I'm going to click on this texture icon, create a render node, and then I'm going to go to Arnold, Shader, and Wireframe, AI Wireframe. Okay, once I have that, I can click render, and nothing's going to happen. There's a couple of additional settings that we need to be aware of. The first is I need to go to my camera. The second is in my render setup window, I need to set this layer to visible or to active. As soon as I do that, now I can see my wireframe. Still needs a little bit of work, but we're pretty close. It's really convenient that Arnold has a wireframe shader built in. But you can see here we have our attribute editor, and there's a couple of options. The first thing is we want to change the edge type to polygons, not triangles, so that cleans it up a little bit. You can adjust the color if you like. Just whatever. If you do decide to adjust the color, just make sure it's contrasty. The idea here is to show off your edge flow, your topology, and so that should be the first priority. That should be clear and easy to see. You can bring that line width down a little bit to like 0.8. If you wanted to go for like maybe a dark blue, could potentially work. But I wouldn't get too weird with it. Like don't do yellow. That looks horrendous and I hate it. So don't do that. Again, just keep in mind that the idea is to show off your work, not to make some weird, hard to look at thing. So that's the wireframe render. We're going to do the same thing to get a clay render. Okay, and clay is just going to give everything the one consistent, easy to see material that you can use just to show off, again, the forms that you create, and without, any of the textures that are contributing to the scene. So again, in the render setup, we're going to click the little plus icon here to create a new layer, and we'll call this the clay layer. I'm going to right click on that and create a collection. Close the render view for a moment. And this time I will include the background in my selection. I can't see it right now, and that's because my render setup, I'm looking at my wireframe render, so I just need to go back up to my scene, turn that on, and now I can select everything. With my next collection selected, I need to call this clay. I'm going to add all of my objects to this collection, and then again, right click, shader override, call it clay, again, keeping up with good naming. And then I'm going to create a new render node, and this is just going to be a basic standard surface shader that I'm going to call clay. There is a clay preset. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to turn this layer on. I'm going to hit render. And then I can open up my hypershade. Okay. don't want that. There we go. I need more screen space. Okay. I can open up my Hypershade with my clay selected. I'm going to go to Presets, Clay, and Replace. And so the Arnold default clay material is this red clay material. These pink highlights are from lights, so don't worry about those. But it does work as clay, but I prefer something a little bit more neutral in tone. So I'm just going to go to Color and lighten that color up. I desaturate it, increase the brightness of it. Do something like that. Okay, again, just something neutral and light. It allows the forms to really feature. The other thing with this clay preset is that it does have subsurface built into it. So just go to that tab and set that down to 0. So we don't really need to worry about subsurface for this. And so that's the clay render. Again, just like the wireframe, it's just a quick override. Really fast, easy way without having to go to every object individually and set it to a specific material. All right, so that is wireframe and clay. Now let's get on to the interesting one that we'll actually use in the finishing process for our final scene renders, and that is ambient occlusion. So first, you might be asking, what the heck is ambient occlusion? Arnold has a page for that too. Ambient occlusion is a fake thing that is meant to replicate a natural phenomenon. It's the idea of kind of contact shadows, that where two objects meet, that intersection tends to be in shadow, and ambient occlusion is a way to kind of fake that and add it to the scene. Let's see if there's a really obvious. Okay, if we ignore the right side here, this is what ambient occlusion is doing. Is it's in these kind of crevices and recesses, tends to be where it's harder for light to get to, and so ambient occlusion is imitating that. And you might not think you really need it, but once you add it, you can see what it does to kind of help elevate, lift, and add depth to your scene. So that's what we're going to do right now, and it's same sort of process here. I'm going to first I'm going to turn on visibility on my scene so I can select everything. I'm going to add a new layer. I'm going to call this, just say AO layer for short. New collection. Again, I'm going to add all the objects, and then right-click the collection, shader override, and there's an Arnold shader for this as well. So Arnold shader ambient occlusion, it's the first option. Once I click that, I can turn on the visibility on that layer and hit render. And here we go. There's our ambient occlusion. It looks like a clay render or just a grayscale render, but it's not quite that straightforward. We've got some options here in the attribute editor. So we have samples. So again, if it starts to get kind of noisy, we can increase the samples to reduce the noise and the shadows and make it creamier, smoother, more natural. Spread, fall off, near clip, far clip, white and black, and some additional options. Really, I'm just going to worry about spread and fall off. So fall off is how quickly those shadows are attenuated, like what's the reach of the shadows, kind of. And then spread is also kind of reach. That's words are hard. We'll just go back to the Arnold renderer. So here we've got a nice demonstration of what spread does. This is one is the most common value. Other values may produce results that are not useful. But you can see how kind of diffused those shadows are with the value of 1 versus with a value of 0.25. It's very kind of tight shadows. We're not really going to worry about white and black. If you do want kind of tinted shadows, this is a way that you can achieve that. For your entire scenes, you probably don't want all the shadows tinted one color, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. And here's fall off. So again, fall off is kind of like the severity of the effect, the intensity of the effect. It's probably the main thing that you'll be adjusting. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to bring that spread back up to 1. I'm going to adjust the fall off just a little bit. Like I probably have to manually type in, let's try like 0.4. Just enough to get it off the backdrop and just worry about the robot, and maybe I'll bring that spread down a little bit. You know, I want some decent contrast in the shadows. And maybe we'll try like 0.3. Yeah, so I think something like that kind of works. Okay, and so once this is done rendering, as with all of these, you can just hit File, you can save the EXR, it just will increase dynamic range. You can also save it as a JPEG, doesn't matter too much for our purposes. Okay. And that's really it. Those are the only additional renders that I wanted to call out today. Then the next video will be about what to do with this ambient occlusion render and the full color render and other things you can do in Photoshop to kind of add that final bit of polish to your still images.